All right, hello everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the downfall of one of Thailand's formerly largest conglomerates, the Stark Corporation. But before we jump in, I want to show this quote from Warren Buffett about reputation. It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently. And I think we'll see throughout this video that this is advice that Stark probably should have taken. So before we jump into what happened, let's talk about what the Stark Corporation is. It is a large Thai, or was, I should say, a large Thai conglomerate that was founded in 1968 and is based out of Bangkok. And its primary business line is wiring and cables for industrial purposes. And there was a form of the Stark Corporation which was already public since 2005, but its current form, so to speak, initially went public in 2019 on the Thai Set exchange. And up until its collapse, it had been on an acquisition streak, buying uh, various companies within the same sector across jurisdictions as well as within Thailand. So then the question really becomes, how do you go from darling of the corporate world to headlines like these? Well, it's an interesting story how we got here, but in order to understand what happened, we need to take a step back. So, rumors first started to fly in the Thai financial press when it seemed that Stark was having trouble delivering their financials on time in 2023. And then on April 20th of 2023, the company announced that it was changing its board of directors and letting go of many key executives, and their board of directors shrunk from 9 members to 6, which is, of course, in itself a red flag. And then at the same time, they confirmed publicly that they were going to have to delay the release of their financial statements for 2023. And they also made public that the Thai SEC was looking in and auditing their financial statements. Eventually, this led to a trading suspension on May 16th by the SEC, and about a month later, trading resumed. And needless to say, it did not go well. Once trading resumed, the shares plunged 92% in one day and then continued to fall in the subsequent days. And we can see from this chart here of the Stark Corporation stock price that it went from a high of over 6 baht per share to literally zero and then eventually being delisted. So why did this collapse actually come? Because it seems to have happened really quickly. So while the entire picture is not yet clear because this has happened relatively recently, the fraud in and of itself does not appear to have been particularly sophisticated. And it seems that what Stark was doing was essentially falsifying their cash and revenue positions over the past several years, especially in 2020, and kind of exploiting their very complex and cross-jurisdictional corporate structure to conceal these activities. And the crux of the fraudulent activity seemed to be in their accounts receivable. And we now know that much of this acquisition spree and expansion was fueled by a huge and unsustainable debt load rather than blatant manipulations. And it seems that what ended up happening was that in 2021, this really was the straw that broke the camel's back, as two Vietnamese subsidiaries that they had recently purchased indicated that they would not be able to repay certain bank loans that they'd taken out. And management kind of created this harebrained scheme to sell shares in the parent company to a Vietnamese state-owned enterprise. But in order for this to work and plug the hole, they would have to be sold at 5 baht per share. And needless to say, the sale didn't go well, and even if it had, it likely would have only made a marginal difference in the short term. Then it also came out that they were suspending the almost 600 million euro acquisition of a German cable maker, and all of these headlines combined ended up in the market just simply losing confidence in Stark as a business. And then now the question is, did anybody see this coming? And it's interesting because whenever we have situations like this, it seems that in hindsight, things that might just appear to be the trappings of a successful company appear rather suspicious, knowing that we know now. But it's also important to note that the cascading effect of these multiple scandals happened very quickly. And the market outlook on Stark was rather positive up until the end. And of course, when everything seems to be going well, there's very little incentive to check what's going on behind the scenes. And we see in this graph excerpt from Nikkei Asia that Stark's profits and revenue seemed rather high for its industry. So now we can dive into a little more specifics regarding their financials. And we see immediately in 2020, based on these numbers, that there is this huge spike in both revenue and net profit in 2020, when it seems across the board, 2020 was a rather neutral year, if not negative, for many companies in a similar sector, obviously due to the COVID pandemic and probably several other factors. And then immediately in 2021 for Stark, we see this huge reversal, this massive swing in the opposite direction. And then in 2022, it just continues. Whereas it seems that the opposite happens for many of its peers, where they see this drawdown in 2020 and then a gradual recovery over 2021 and 2022. So immediately, just looking at these numbers, it seems that something fishy is going on. Just whenever you see these astronomical swings in either direction, it immediately raises suspicion. So now looking at some more numbers that are specific to Stark, we see that from 2019 through 2020, it's the same thing. We see these huge swings, especially from 2020 to 2021. And we also see indications that much of this expansion is fueled by a huge debt burden that is clearly unsustainable. And we see this by looking at several ratios, such as debt to capital. And we see also that in 2021, the equity in the company actually goes negative and it never recovers. And we see that the interest coverage also shrinks from 618% in 2020 to negative 264% in 2022. So it seems that just looking at these numbers, that from a financial perspective, it seemed rather obvious that something fishy was going on. And then, of course, there are the non-financial fraud indicators that we discussed before. And as I mentioned earlier, it seems that the non-financial fraud indicators all happened in a very, very fast succession. So it was very difficult for the market to digest, to really see what was coming before much of this came to light. And of course, we see that the chairman of the company himself fled to Hong Kong, which is obviously never a good sign if you're managing a massive company and want to appear like everything is going well. So this then begs the question, what did the auditor actually find in their report? And as I alluded to earlier, it seems that what was going on was that they were using their complex corporate structure to essentially hide the fact that they weren't making as much money as that what they were saying by issuing phony invoices, especially in one of their subsidiaries called Thai Cable International. And it seems that across many of their subsidiaries, they were doing similar schemes, essentially falsifying invoices and then underreporting their accounts payable. So as I alluded to, it seems to be just kind of blatant fraud across the board and just taking advantage of the fact that they were such a large multi-jurisdictional company and essentially hoping that nobody would peek beneath the surface. So then this begs the question, what can we learn from Stark's downfall? And unfortunately, the answer is not really that much. And I think this quote from the legendary author Mark Twain himself, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes," very much highlights again what was going on in the situation. There's nothing inherently unique or sophisticated about Stark's fraud in and of itself. It's something that we've seen across the board. It's certainly not unique to Thailand or any other jurisdiction for that matter. It's just taking advantage of the fact that people just don't see what they don't look for. And that's what we see across these different scandals time and time again. And of course, it's impossible for regulators to be everywhere and know exactly what's going on in every single one of the companies that they oversee. And also in just hearts and minds, the role of auditing itself is overblown. And whenever we see scandals like this, we always immediately ask, oh, how could the auditors not have picked up on this? We hear this time and time again, when the reality is the auditors are not necessarily there to detect fraud. They're there to make sure that the income statements and balance sheets and whatever are correctly put together given the information from the company, which is, of course, assumed to be accurate because it usually is. And I think another part of it is that people just have a deferential attitude towards large, boring, established industries where they just assume that something like this couldn't be going on. So, with all of that said, it's just a good reminder to, as an investor, don't put all your eggs in one basket, and then have a healthy degree of skepticism about what you see. And if it doesn't look right, there probably is something fishy going on. All right. Thank you all for watching, and I hope that you were able to learn something new.